That's kind of what dream tethering is all about. It's like moving into the feelings of the future and pulling that thing that you want to create to you. That amplified feeling before it actually occurs, you become like a vortex and you pull those things to you. But you have to surrender the how.
Hi, I'm Ryan Munsey, and welcome to the Move to Change podcast. As an entrepreneur, best-selling author, performance coach, and keynote speaker, I help athletes, executives, and leaders take the next steps towards success. Look, everyone needs big goals, but unless you attack it one step at a time, you will get overwhelmed and fall short. Breaking your big goals into actionable steps and helping you develop consistency is what I help you do. Each week on this show, I will give you the best tools and tips to achieve your big dreams, and also interview some of the world's most successful folks so we can learn how they've managed to push through and achieve their dreams. Look, if you're into mindset, I know you're going to love this episode. We're going to learn from a special guest who can tell us all about the science of consciousness, visualization, self-talk, manifesting, creating reality in our mind to unlock your potential. Our guest this week is Tim Shields. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Look, we're really excited to talk to you. So just to kind of continue your bio, you're a writer, editor, literary collaborator, working at the intersection of science and consciousness and human potential. Maybe best known for your collaborations with Dr. Joe Dispenza and Dr. Zach Bush. You help artists and visionaries, global change makers articulate their transformative ideas. I'm really anxious to get into that side of it with you as well. You've written 2 books of your own, Curious Year in the Great Vivarium Experiment. You've got an upcoming book, Dream Tethering, 13 Keys to Creating the Life of Your Dreams. We'll talk about this one too. You also host the Inciting Incident, a podcast that dives into the defining moments behind today's most inspiring visionaries. A lot of ground to cover. So Tim, let's kick this off. You were telling me before we hit record that you actually played college soccer. I'm curious, where and when in your life did you first maybe experience or buy in to the power of self-talk, visualization, or maybe even the importance of avoiding the negative side of that?
Well, I can tell you one thing about my college soccer career. I was just kind of a natural athlete, got a full ride to a top 20 D1 school, and I was not the best trainer, let's say that. I always relied on natural talent, and then I got into college, and it was another level. But I was always the guy that came into training camp like out of shape. It was like me and the goalkeepers, but I usually got there pretty quick. I wound up really disliking my soccer coach. I just didn't like the way, maybe I was like too sensitive a kid or something, but I didn't like the way I wanted more of a positive force, and he was kind of this negative force. And he also started like coaching high school football. And I used to say all the time out loud, like, I wish I could just keep my scholarship and not have to play. And then I wound up being injured for 3 out of 4 years. And I realized probably a decade ago, I was like, oh my God, that was my first self-fulfilling prophecy, because I was speaking this into existence. Of course, I didn't know anything about it back then, but I just, and then there were injuries where I would still have to play like in the spring season and winter. And I was just like, I have to refine this, out loud speak.
So you had to go through all the training camps and the 5 a.m. stuff off season, and you didn't get to do any of the games.
Joke's on me.
So you said you realized that kind of a decade later. What were some of the things that maybe you had been exposed to, or how did you start to put those pieces together?
Well, I always say kind of my inciting incident was a couple things happened when I was 17, but one of them was I took a huge dose of mushrooms at a Grateful Dead concert, and I was just kind of like, whatever is happening in this reality is so much bigger and more expanded than we think. And I idolized my sister's boyfriend, who was about a decade older than me. He made looking smart, cool, and he was athletic, had good look, and had everything going for him. And I was like, I want to be like him. And he was an aspiring writer, and he was always like, you should start keeping a journal. So when I was 17, I started putting pen to paper. And then I just, cataloged a couple of the last few years of my journals. And I have 60 journals of my life on paper since September 29th, 1991. So, the other thing is I wanted to be a writer so bad. I just started asking, God or whatever you want to call it, to use me as an instrument of peace, just speak through me. I want to be a writer. I want to express the mystery so bad. And I mean, I never could have imagined in a million years that would intersect me with people like Dr. Joe Dispenza or Zach Bush or Dr. Zach Bush. And so it's really, I was stuck in corporate America for a really long time. And I was, I just came out of college and I thought people were just going to pay me to travel around the world and write about it. Hello. So, I made my way through marketing and advertising but I was just always, it's kind of like my dream tethering thing. The goal was always focused on living the life of a writer, becoming a writer. And, what is a dream? A dream is the embodiment of a thought in a physical reality. So, it's just everything sort of lined up. And then in January 2010, my sisters took me to a Dr. Joe Dispenza event. That was my first one. And I was just sitting in the audience like, oh my God, like this guy is wrapped a toolbox of language around all these things I've been, pondering. And so one of my sisters kept standing up and finally he was like, hey, I want to talk to you. She thought she was in trouble. He's like, what's going on? She's like, I hurt my back sleigh riding with my kid. So he's like, all right, let's go find a room. I'll give you an adjustment. And it turns out that before I was born, my family lived one town over from his in New Jersey. So, as Jersey people, outside of Jersey, blah, 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 you went to Alfonso's Pizza. We went to Alfonso's Pizza. And he invited us to be his guest for dinner that night. And I was trying to put my first sort of work out into the world. And I was looking for a literary agent. He's like, I think I can find you this person, but he couldn't track her down, but we stayed connected. And I would go, I guess I should also talk about speaking things into existence. And my sister reminded me this about a decade ago, but when I left that first weekend, I said to my sisters, I'm going to write for that guy someday. I want to work with that guy. So, I went once a year for 5 years. 2015, I go to this workshop and it was in Carefree, Arizona. And I was like focusing on creating a full-time job so I could finish my first book because I was always freelancing. And every time the job ended, I would have to change my energy, change my direction, look for the next job. And then I wanted to create a mentor. And the whole time I'm beating myself up because everybody's having these profound internal transcendental experiences. And I'm just like, I'm doing it wrong. I'm a failure at this, and then I go home and I'm still on the tarmac in Seattle. And I get this LinkedIn message from a friend. And he's like, hey, I just left Microsoft for this unicorn company. We need a writer. You got to apply. And I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. So I take the light rail into Seattle and I run into this guy on the street corner. And he's like, you really got to apply this job. Long story short, I get the job. Every day before work, I go to a coffee shop for 6 months, whether it was 30 minutes or an hour and a half. I got up early. I went to the coffee shop. It took exactly 6 months to finish this draft. And I was like, oh my God, I think I actually have like a real book here. And right when I finished that book, I wound up getting laid off. But I was so lit up from, finishing this draft. I was like, yes, I'm free. I'm just going to work on this draft all winter. And I was, again, like the feeling, I was so lit up. I walked out of the building and I was like, I said out loud, what amazing thing is about to happen to me? And about 3 minutes later, I got a text from Dr. Joe Dispenza's assistant and was like, hey, Dr. Joe would like to talk to you about helping him edit his blogs. Would you be interested? And I was like, whoa. So that kind of started my, really about 2015 and I've fallen off the last 2 months, but I've been a regular meditator since about 2015. I mean, I still do it maybe once or twice a week. I really need to just get back into my habit. I do other practices, but That's kind of really when my life started to change, when I started meditating every day, and really in that meditation, moving into the feelings of the future. That's kind of what dream tethering is all about. It's like moving into the feelings of the future and pulling that thing that you want to create to you. If you become that amplified feeling before it actually occurs, you become like a vortex and you pull those things to you. But you have to surrender the how.
I think that's where a lot of people get hung up or get stuck. That last part you just said, surrendering the how. And I think before I go into a lot of the questions I want to ask you here, I just want to point out to the listeners, you just outlined an amazing blueprint for making something happen in terms of, identifying potential mentors, getting in the arena, you're doing the work behind the scenes, even a great example of moving the chains with the show up at the coffee shop and, do 30 minutes a day to an hour and a half a day, whatever it is. I mean, that was just a master class in, had I asked the question or I guess like, well, in the show notes, we'll say like, the headline there is like, how to, I don't know, whatever. But I think if somebody listening has something that they want to try to achieve or has identified somebody that they want to try to work with, that was a great blueprint to make that happen. So as you're talking through that, I think my first real, I'll say buy-in. I'd had coaches tell me, actually, I played soccer too.
Oh, wow.
And in high school, we had a coach that introduced us to visualization and stuff. And I didn't dismiss it, but I also didn't really lean into it. In college, I got into bodybuilding and lifting, and of course, Arnold and his encyclopedia. And he's somebody, if you've ever studied him, he's been huge on visualization, speaking things into existence. And he's a person that has fascinated me throughout his entire life with his ability to invent and reinvent himself and to be able to accomplish things that, a dude born in the 50s in Austria probably should not have been able to accomplish.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's where I first, like I said, bought into the value of visualization. And I think I'd love for you to maybe walk us through a few questions on what you just explained and as it ties into, dream tethering, how would you coach somebody through cultivating this practice? Say somebody says, okay, I get it. I realize it's important. Now, how do I make this something that I'm consciously stepping into on a regular basis?
Well, I think first you need a very clear definition of what you want to create or what you're doing. I was running down the beach one day in Oregon about 2017, and my mission statement just dropped in whole and complete. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like fumbling to write it down on my phone, but I translate light, frequency, and energy into story so as to lead others to their truth. That's my personal mission statement. It's a bit quantum. My professional one is I help artists, visionaries, and global change makers articulate and amplify their message through the economy of words. So I've had opportunities to work with some interesting people and maybe bigger name people, but if it doesn't fit into what I am doing and what my mission is, then it's not going to be a good match. And I'm not going to be passionate about it. And I'm very passionate about writing. And, it's like this jigsaw puzzle to me to say the most powerful thing with the least amount of words and the most powerful imagery. So, you have to know what you're doing. I think you have to be passionate about it. I'm very passionate about writing. I'm very passionate about trying to express the ineffable, the mysteries of the universe. And you have to be disciplined, which is one of probably the biggest things. And people always, ask me for writing coaching or, all this stuff. And I'm like, do you want to know the real secret? Sit your ass in a chair and put a timer on. And then then we can talk about everything else. But you need to get into that. You need to be disciplined to do that. Now, the part about the creation, if we are in fact energy beings and we live in this reality, this quantum reality of energy, frequency, vibration, then you have to become that before it manifests. So you become that magnet that pulls the possibility to you. And I think you do that through the alignment of the mind, body, and spirit. So the mind, thoughts, body, the energy, and spirit, your soul, your passion. And you have to do that through four things: right thinking, right language, right action, and right feeling. So I think those aspects are how you become a more powerful, energetic attractor to which you want to create. And if we're in this quantum model of reality and all possibilities already exist in the field, then you are creating the vibration, the frequency, and the energy of that which already exists, and you are pulling it towards you. So it's the possibility already exists, but you have to, in this part, you have to kind of surrender your limited thinking, because when you have limited thinking, you take away from how big the possibility could be. And I lived in that for years. I mean, my whole dream tethering book, it took me 4.5 years to write. It took me 34 years to live. And, a lot of big, powerful, dumb, painful lessons. But, that's why I wrote this, because this is the information I was looking for when I was a young man. Some guidance, another way to think about reality. And, instead of the old model where you're just kind of a bowling ball trying to get what you want, a wrecking ball, it's like, no, the reality is you become still and you go in and you create from that centered place of stillness.
I love that answer. You mentioned being able to, you're with your personal and your professional mission statements, being able to help others bring their work into reality. Mm-hmm. With your background in marketing and advertising, that's just, I find it fascinating that I believe that marketing is basically the other side of this same coin.
Yeah, for sure.
You find that is helpful for you, having that background and that knowledge and being able to help people express their bring their work into the world and do what you do, because it's a very unique, I guess, value prop that you have.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably as far as like a self-marketer, I'm terrible. I got to become better at that. But as far as working with somebody, now the first question I ask them is like, what's the business case for this book? Like, what do you want to achieve? So those kind of questions, like long-term questions, I think have been very valuable. And, sometimes I think of something within the narrative, and I was like, well, you could link to this, you could create a landing page or, whatever. So I think that I've never actually thought about that before, but yeah, I mean, I have kind of a unique path, but it's like this fine line between purposeful and accidental. But I mean, I think the purposeful part is the dream tether, and that's, I've always been focused on this. And, I sometimes I look at my life and I'm like, I've got sort of this like Forrest Gump serendipity, synchronicity, just like crazy things happening and guiding me. And, another exercise I do every day, and this is kind of the story arc, this created the story arc of the first book. But, I had a decade of sick parents, and my dad died in like 2004, my mom in 2010. So I was always going home to visit my parents while my friends were going on vacation. So my mom passed away. I'm like, all right, it's my time. And I bought a one-way ticket to India. And when my mom passed away, I thought I was ready because she had Parkinson's and dementia and stuff. But the finality of that is like the rug being swept out of you from underneath you. And I felt very lost and kind of scared. And my one sister's friend, who's kind of an energy healer type person, I was just talking to her and she's like, all right, you're a writer. I want you to do this exercise. I want you to write down 5 things you're grateful for and 5 things you want to create. She's like, do it every day. And you're going to find that the things you create today are going to be the things you're grateful for in the future. And I was like, I'll try anything right now. So I just started doing it, and everything started unfolding out of it. And then at one point, I didn't have a plan going to India. Like, it was like land in Delhi, go to Dharamsala. I was terrified. Like, it seems like, oh, I'm so, brave and powerful, but like I was freaking terrified on the inside. But then once this is something I think that's important for your listeners. What I've always learned time and again is when you jump, the net appears. But when you're like standing at the edge of that cliff and you're looking into the abyss and you're looking into the unknown, it's freaking terrifying because it's the unknown. But that is actually where we want to move our life, into the unknown self, because we know all this. The unknown self is the expansion of self. So anyway, I wound up, I was like, okay, I want to be of service while I'm traveling. And I wound up volunteering for this guy who's won the equivalent of 2 Nobel Prizes in grassroots environmentalism, sued the state of India over the course of 20 years to create a green zone around the Taj Mahal. Every Friday, the Supreme Court of India held special cases for him, for the voiceless people and the land of India. And I just got to, hang out with him for like a month and a half. I said yes to volunteering at an eco ashram. And I was like, sure, what the hell is an eco ashram? And so, but it turns out that he wanted some grants written. And I was like, well, I've never written a grant, but I'm a writer. All I need is the structure and I can figure it out with you. So, that's just an example of, this one American scientist I met over there said, this is the most important lawyer in India since Gandhi. And I just got to like hang out with him for a month and a half, 2 months, like the most beautiful, kind, gentle man. But apparently he was an absolute animal and shark in the courts. He had never lost a case. Yeah.
Did you learn anything specifically from him or big takeaways from your time with him?
I mean, he was a man of great faith, and it just kind of reinforced my own. I've been really lucky to meet some really powerful people. And, I think, and I don't mean like, I mean internally powerful people, not like, whoa, in the world, but like internally powerful people. And that's what I'm attracted to. And, it just kind of, you sort of expand in their presence because they're an expansive person. So it just kind of reinforced things I knew. I mean, I wrote the whole first third of that book. It takes place in India, and I fictionalized it, but it is based on my story because it was like too much for me to write so close about myself at that time in my life. So I haven't read it in a really long time, but it's like when you meet somebody like that, it's almost like, I feel like Joe Dispenza is like that too. And Zach Bush, like you're in their presence and there's almost this ancillary effect of raising your vibration. And I mean, that sounds woo-woo, but we could talk about it in quantum physics, but it's really the extent of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could talk about it directly, but even indirectly, I feel like that's one of the topics that we talk about here on this podcast is leadership. And I feel like that is something that could also be said about great leaders. Right?
Yes, for sure.
And so if somebody listening wants to say, okay, well, that's a little too woo-woo, if we bring it back to leadership, if you want to be a great leader, you should desire to have the ability to be expansive or for others to feel like that in your presence. So how would you guide somebody who would want to develop that ability, the ability to be an expansive presence for others?
It's really an inside job. I mean, you have to change from the inside out. Leadership, everything else, creation, it all begins inside. And, to go back to, to tie it together to leadership, I think what I learned from him and what I've learned from all these people is to be uncompromising in their vision. And as far as working with like Dr. Joe and Dr. Zach Bush, I think it's the quality of the questions they ask and their relentless curiosity. And then, something I've also recognized in all these people's, it's about service at the end of the day. Like if you're in a leadership role for yourself and your ego and etc., you might be successful, but you're probably going to get there and you're going to be alone on the top of the mountain. And all those problems you still have that you've been outrunning, that I call the soul ache, they're going to catch up to you. And then that's where like people go off the deep end with drugs, sex, addictions, because they don't feel whole inside. So, I think the most important thing for any leadership position is to have a vision and be uncompromising in it. And that vision, of course, we're humans, so we have an ego that likes to be fed and caressed. But at the end of the day, it has to be for a greater vision of, your family, your community, the world. Because, no man is an island, said the poet John Donne. Like we are kind of a pack herd. We are a species that thrives in community, not isolation. So if you can be of service to your community, I think it's a much faster route to success.
So as you're talking through that, I took a few notes from your website prior to this, and you've got a new page on your site, the 25 things.
Yeah.
And one of them is you don't have to heal anyone else. Due to the fractal nature of the universe, meaning a repeating pattern at all scales, when you heal yourself, you heal others. I think that kind of fits in with what you're talking about here. The leadership work has to start from within. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that one specifically?
Well, if let's just say if the healer archetype goes too far, they become the martyr, and they're putting everybody else's, needs ahead of theirs. And over time, that's going to become sickness, or it's going to become resentment, but it's going to become the opposite of the archetype that you were seeking to do. Take me back to the question again, because I got lost in the archetypes. I was like about to go down this whole side.
So your line in the 25 things.
Oh, right.
You don't have to heal anyone else, right? Heal yourself, and that'll take care of others.
I mean, you have to be an example to others, and I guess I can, if I took that all the way down a notch, like I was probably in relationships, I was trying to heal these wounded women. Not always, but at a deep level. And, I did the deep sludge work, and it's like, oh, I was trying to heal or make happy my mother. So, if you're always operating out of these unconscious programs, wounds, you might think you're giving, but you're actually taking. But when you are in a state of wholeness, then you are giving, and the wholeness recognizes that you have to take care of you first as a whole human. But, it's just like if you walk into a room, if somebody walks into a room and they're super lit up, and everybody turns to them because they're emanating their internal energy. And you're just like, whoa, I want to talk to that dude or that woman or something like that, because they have this inner light. And it's because I think, what do I know? But I think they've done the internal work to become more whole. And it's a never ending labyrinth. There's always more shit, beneath the next level of the labyrinth. But I think that's kind of the game of life. Mm-hmm. It's this, never ending kind of repeating pattern, fractal labyrinth that probably goes back to, I say in the new book, like our core childhood wounds. So I think the more aware you are of these all night pity parties that hang out in the dark corners of your being, shine a light on them, get them out, the more successful you're going to be, the more you're going to be of service. because you're not going to be, let's say you're a leader and somebody just whatever asks some question, but the leader in their mind, something about it reminds them of their mother always nagging them, and they're coming at this person from their 7th grade self. I've experienced this with not leaders, but other people and at one time I actually had the awareness, instead of just like going ballistic on this person, I was like, oh my God, I'm talking to a 4th grader right now. So luckily I had the awareness to kind of disarm the situation. So yeah, I mean, I think like, me, it's all about mindset, and beneath mindset is self-awareness.
Right. Do you have any favorite strategies that you use personally to identify whether it's limiting beliefs? You mentioned like the limiting thoughts earlier when we were talking about visualization and self-talk and being that magnet to pull things, and then here with say patterns of poor choices in relationships, whatever the things are, right?
Yeah.
Any favorite strategies that you use personally to identify those?
Well, something I started doing in the last couple months, I was going for a walk in sort of this Palm Canyon near me, which is where I get all my information, and I just go to chill. And I was feeling really anxious, and I didn't know why. So I started doing this exercise, and I just drew a triangle on my whiteboard with like the tip pointing down. And I put the sponsoring emotion on top. It's like anxiety. Okay, what's beneath that? And I was like, all right, I'm moving into a new part of my life. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's this and that. And it's, so you get down to it usually takes four times, 4 or 5 layers, and you get down to what it actually is. And the first time I actually did that, I went a step further and I drew a line to the right of the triangle with these emotions. And I was like, where did these come from? And it came from my father, and through no fault of his own, but he was, I call myself a martini baby. My dad was in World War II. He was the 3rd day in Normandy.
Oh, wow.
So, I'm like the closest siblings, 8.5 years older than me. So it was a bit of a surprise, a blessing in the Irish Catholic tradition, as they say. But he was shut down at this space that I was always trying to meet him, which was like this emotional bonding. And there was no question that he didn't love me, but it was just like a need of mine that didn't get met. So, you develop coping strategies over the course of your life, which just become, these sort of internal prison bars, really. I've only realized this in the last, couple years, or maybe during the process of writing these books, but like, you put up these walls to protect yourself, but the truth is you're imprisoning yourself. So I call it what's beneath that. And I do it pretty regularly now. And I really find it to be an effective strategy. And I think that just by recognizing where these unconscious, fears, traumas, or limited thinking is coming from, through the awareness, you can begin to disentangle them. Yeah. Because then you recognize where they show up in your life. You recognize why you're feeling that way. And you can just be like, screw that shit. That's a past.
Right. Yeah. And as you're talking about that, it reminds me of be like the buffalo lesson, right? And buffalo go into the storm.
Oh, yeah.
And you use, the analogy here is you use whatever the thing is as a true north. That's your compass point, that's the direction you most need to go. And I think a lot of times, at least when I'm talking about that advice, it's with maybe an external issue, something at work or this or that, or, whatever it is. But in this example, it's an internal thing. And I think that's an overlooked aspect of this advice. And when you have, like you just pointed out, you're feeling anxious or you've got a fear, go right at it and dig deeper. the questions that you're talking about, I learned that as peeling the layers of the onion. And,
Yeah.
it's 4, 5, 6 levels down. You get triggered by a social media post. Okay. Well, why does that bother me? You come up with an answer. Okay. Well, why does that bother me? Why
Mm-hmm.
does that bother me? Whatever it is. So,
I think, mastery, at the end of the day, really the only thing that we have control over in our life is our reaction to the external environment. So that is really, I think, what mastery is, whether you're a soldier in a foxhole or you are leading a corporation or you are, in a relationship. You have to, if you can take that pause and master your response, before the stimulus or vice versa, then that is the path to mastery. Because then you're not like, how many times have I said something, either of us, that, it came out and you're like, shit, I am going to regret that for so long, and so that's what I'm trying to work on.
Yeah, I talk about that. I've heard someone else, so I've kind of borrowed the word as a wedge. But the idea is that you're creating as much space between stimulus and response as you can.
Yeah.
Right. And in that space, even if it's a breath, it gives you a chance to move from limbic or lizard brain reaction to prefrontal cortex. What's the best response, or how do I best facilitate the desired outcome? Okay, this is a better way of phrasing that, or a better way of whatever. I'm going to choose this route. And a lot of times it only takes half a second or
yeah.
And if we can just train ourselves to put that wedge in there, take that space, you don't have to respond right away.
That is something I would like to improve myself.
I'm sure that you will. You sound like somebody who puts things into action. That's another thing I want to ask you with a lot of this, whether it's manifestation or dream tethering. I think there's at least for me personally, I have a negative connotation with the word manifesting.
Yeah.
Again, I'm a huge fan of visualization and the power of thoughts. I guess my negative connotation there is best summarized by the statement, hope is not a strategy.
Right.
Right. And so I think a lot of people want to manifest, but they're not actually doing the right actions. I think that was the 4 bullet points you mentioned earlier. So how do you kind of thread that needle of, or how do you marry those? Like, what does that look like for you? Where it's like, yeah, we're going to manifest, but we've also got to do the work.
Well, I feel like you a bit about the word manifest. I think there's very specific places to use it, but I just think of it as creating, so this is what I'm going to create in my life. And, it requires, I think, this is just my personal experience, but it requires revisiting that vision every single day. And, when I do that, like I said, like the dream is, it's a feeling that you want to have in the future, and, so, it's like when we were in grade school, if you were a daydreamer, they'd squash you, but those probably became the most creative and successful people. It's because they're like in a different,
What's the quote? I'll look it up. There's some quote about some people dream when they sleep, but the ones who are really dangerous are the ones who dream with their eyes open.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. So, again, it's like, I think when you are, you're in that dream, you're in a state of trance, you are, so, your body's there, but really your mind is kind of somewhere else. It's engaged with something else. And for me, I guess it's, that's how I kind of get a lot of the information that when I'm writing or when I'm going for walks. And I notice that they come in 2 different streams, but the goal is to get into the trance state for me, because when you distract that thinking brain, then, you have you have space for more information from the field to come through. Mm-hmm. And, somebody asked me recently, they were like, well, where do you feel it when you're getting this information? I had never really thought about it before. And when I'm writing and I like tap into that stream of information, I realize like my left head is kind of cocked and I'm like, my mouth is a little bit open. And it's like this lecture of my higher self is coming in. So it's a very organized stream of information, which is the left brain. And I realized there is this whole other type of stream of information that is like a torrent that comes in. And it like, I'll like go into, this almost pause state because this whole pattern of information is coming in. And my job then is to like write down. I always have a pocket notebook on me or put it into my notes, but like write down as much as I can, because then I have to translate that pattern of information that came in a stream. And that's the craft.
Just as you're talking, I mean, this is my life almost to a T. I mean, I've got notebooks everywhere, notepads everywhere. I use the note app on my phone, and it's the same thing. Sometimes you're driving, sometimes it's, when I'm walking or training or whatever. And for me, movement is a big part of it. And even, like I said, driving, mowing, being on a tractor, because like you said, that thinking brain is somewhat distracted, and that other thing can be tapped into whatever that higher realm is. And you're like, oh, I got to write that down before I forget it.
Yeah. I mean, that same thing, like when I was younger, mowing my parents' lawn, like this is where it first started, I started getting this information kind of, and then, most of this book came through in this amazing Palm Desert Canyon near where I live. And I would just come to an end of a chapter and I didn't know what was next. And I would just put my headphones on, put on something that's either like melodic or improvisational, so I could get lost in that, stream of information. And this is important for maybe listeners, but like every time I go for the walk, I ask myself the creative question that needs to be solved. And then I don't have to think about it. I don't have to think about it or try and wrestle with something like I did when I was younger in advertising. Like I just ask the question and I get out of the way. That's the trance state. And then boom, 100% of the times I get information.
I love that. I mean, I could see that being a useful tip for, anybody in an office, if you're struggling or wrestling with a problem, or you can't come up with a solution to whatever. And like, hey, I'm going to go walk to, whatever, take a 5-minute walk, 10-minute walk, whatever. And like you said, when you start that thing, you ask the question, put on some headphones, do whatever, get distracted. And yeah, I think that's awesome.
Like for me, it is like moving through space and time. It's doing something physical. I mean, even if it's like cleaning my kitchen before I sit down to write, it's like you're kind of letting your subconscious brain organize these thoughts before you sit down to organize these thoughts.
Yeah. Do you feel like, because you have a background in sports, that the movement part is something that you naturally gravitate to?
Probably, but I'm also a lazy bastard. But luckily, like about 4 years ago, I started playing tennis, and I just went all in, and I'm kind of obsessed with tennis. If I didn't do that, I definitely probably wouldn't do as much. I try to go for a hike or a walk a couple times a week, even if it's only like a mile. But yeah, I mean, I think and this is kind of going in a different direction, but when I was probably in my 20s or something, and I was, sort of lost going to see therapists, and the therapist would be like, you live up here, you have to be in your body. And there I am, like trying to intellectually reason what that meant, because I was so separated. My mind and body was so separated. And maybe that's because I lost it, like when I stopped playing sports. I mean, I played soccer from 5 to 23. And yeah, I mean, and now it's like, embodiment is the whole purpose of this dimension. It's like you're translating these thoughts and feelings and etc. into knowledge and wisdom through the vehicle of consciousness, which is the body.
Wasn't that the original intent of yoga?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a yogi or anything like that, but yeah, it sounds about right.
One other question I want to make sure we have plenty of time to get into was this concept of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey as evolution of consciousness.
Mm.
Let's say a listener doesn't even know what Joseph Campbell's hero's journey is. Maybe let's start there and take that into the consciousness part of it.
So Joseph Campbell was an American professor, and I think in 1949 he wrote the Hero with a Thousand Faces. And basically, the hero's journey is a story arc. It is a story arc that transcends religion, time, culture, etc. And in his hero's journey, there's 17 steps, but in its most reductionist form, it is, the hero is called from the known world into the unknown world, and then he faces initiations and challenges, and then he returns to where he came from with new knowledge and information about for the collective. So it's really while it is it's sort of an external story arc, and of course it's about the transformation of the inner world. For me, I kind of modernized it to be about the evolution of consciousness, because obviously we're not the same person when we're 2, 5, 7, etc. So I kind of created these 12 stages, that is based somewhat on my life and also just observing other people. But, it kind of starts out before we even come into the human body. It starts as energy. So if you imagine, a DNA strand, it's the double helix. And let's say you have one strand is your mother and one strand is your father. You're inheriting not only these, the physical traits, the genetic, but you're inheriting energetic patterns as well. So, we come into life with not only a genetic blueprint, but an energetic blueprint. And then, there's different stages like, in my thing, the next stage is mirror neurons. So that's how we start learning from our environment. We started mimicking things. And so the first couple stages, it's like you're picking up the programming and conditioning of, your environment. And then there's a crisis stage. And it's pretty detailed, but it's about the internal journey of our life. And, we're in Hollywood and everything, TV shows, it's all about this external journey, but really the mark of a successful person is about what they had to overcome to become who they are. Because we all start with these limiting programs, limiting beliefs, inherited, beliefs and wounds and energetic traumatic patterns from our parents. So I would say it's about disentangling and shedding all those things so you can become your true authentic self. And really it's about awakening eventually to the fact that energy is greater than matter, and we're actually energy beings first and foremost. So when you can get to that realization, you can start to alter reality from the power of your internal world. It's much more, it's much well said in writing, but that's my shot.
I think that's why you and I both have an affinity for the written version, because these are like, you wrestle with these things in your head. And when you're on a podcast like this, you're like, man, it never comes out the way that you want to be able to write it.
I'm also like, oh man, where do I begin? I haven't actually thought about how to distill it into a little tiny pitch. So thank you for that. Gonna work on that one, but.
Well, I don't think that was bad.
No, not at all. But yeah.
So, and I think even you kind of, even the way you ended it, I think it brings it full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning with, being able to do the dream tethering and to tap into that energy aspect of it and bring things to you. So let's do this, Tim. Where can listeners get more of you? We talked about the podcast. The first book is out. Second one will be out next year. Give us a rundown of where we can find all of that.
My website is therealtimshields.com. Everything is kind of in there. I'm in the process of redoing it. The first book, you can also find a book trailer and everything, acuriousyear.com. And on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, The Real Tim Shields. And the podcast is called The Inciting Incident with Tim Shields, and that's on all platforms as well. So,
all right, we'll put links to all of those in the show notes. We'll make it easy for you guys to find that and go check out more of Tim's work. Tim, your final piece of advice for a listener who might want to be more consistent to get better at moving the chains on a daily basis.
First of all, realize that you are a creator and not a victim. Understand your creatorship and understand that anything is possible. And get really still and quiet and spend the time to get really focused on what you want to create in life. Who are the people you want to be surrounded with? Where do you want to live? What do you want to be doing? Most importantly, what do all these things make you feel? Because that's the feeling factor is I think the bridge between the present and the future. Because the feeling is the embodiment of that future reality that you want to live.
I love that you get into the granular details of that. Like, where do you want to live? Who do you want to be around? How do you want to spend your days? I think that's a really overlooked part of doing that exercise. So, Tim, thank you so much for hanging out with us today on the Move the Change podcast.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
This has been a blast. So for everybody listening, I'm glad you're here. Excited for the conversations that we're going to be bringing you guys, all the guests, just like Tim. Every week, continue to bring you tips and tools on how to use Move the Chains in your day-to-day life with real-world examples from my life, my coaching clients, friends, and other high-performing, successful folks so that you can see how they use Move the Chains or their version of it to fuel their successes. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the Move the Chains podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you dig what you hear, leave us a review, share it with your friends. That all helps. Thanks for being here.